We mentioned yesterday in our crisis update that economic experts fear this global recession could last a long time. They link that to the anxiety that will linger long after the crisis ends, along with the economic pain that came from the abrupt halt to most commercial activity.
We're joined now via Skype by economist Jason Furman for more on this. Jason's a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Jason, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Jason, of course, we would like first your reaction to these unemployment numbers, 6.6 million initial claims that were filed. Seen some speculation that puts the unemployment rate somewhere around 10%, which was at the height of the Great Recession whenever you were working in the White House. Just your immediate reaction to those numbers and what Washington needs to do in order to make sure these people get the relief that they need.
Yeah, it was just a horrific economic data point. Never seen a number anywhere close to that. And it's 6.6 million people are underlying that number, 10 million including last week. This is something that took months to get to this point in the Great Recession. Now it's taken just 2 weeks.
Right.
I think there is a small silver lining in this. These people are filing for a benefit. That benefit is going to be an extra $600 a week because of legislation that was passed, the CARES Act. The states have more money for administering their systems, which are just massively stressed right now. More people are eligible than used to be eligible. So there's a lot of things in place for these people, but the system is just under enormous strain.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that thank God that at least those unemployment benefits have been kicked up to help people be able to get through this time. Thank God they've been extended to include gig workers and contract workers and the like. But do you think that the government response in general has been the right approach? Because some other countries have focused more on trying to keep people on the payroll, keep them attached to their jobs, which of course in our country has a lot of implications in terms of their health insurance as well. Do you think that we could have approached this differently to try to keep people attached to the work that they were in?
You know, an important goal for policy is keeping as much of the economy intact, hibernating in a coma, whatever you want to call it, so you can wake it up when it's safe for the economy to operate well. It's hard to figure out how to do that. In Europe, a number of countries are paying employers to pay their workers while their workers aren't working. Here, we were nervous that that might take 2 months, that employers that had no revenue wouldn't be able to front that money, knowing that the government would repay them 2 months from now. And one thing that was done in the unemployment insurance reform is if you furlough your workers, you have them temporarily not work, they can collect unemployment insurance. You could then rehire, or not rehire, reactivate those employees relatively easily. You know, I have no idea what fraction of the 10 million are furloughed versus fired. Those data are not available yet. But it's a tough thing to figure out how to put an economy in a coma at a time like this.
Mm-hmm. So, Jason, let's lean on your experience from the Obama administration getting us out of the Great Recession and that experience. What are some of the lessons maybe that were learned and put forward in some of this legislation that you're heartened to see? And then maybe what are some of the things that we haven't seen based on your experience that we need to see?
Right. You know, first of all, one lesson is it's just hard to imagine how big things are. And so you want to stay 1 or 2 steps ahead. You know, a month ago, no one was calling for anything like this. Even 3 weeks ago, there were people talking about $100 billion, and then Congress passed $2 trillion, which is great. But a second lesson is it's not just the short, sharp period, it's that these things can last a while. The unemployment rate next year in 2021, even if we discover a vaccine, is likely to be significantly elevated because of all the trauma the economy has gone through. And so making sure you have programs that aren't just big up front, but that you continue them, you stick with it. You could include triggers to make sure they automatically continue. And that's what Congress is going to need to do. They're going to need to come back and do more of what they've done and have it last longer.
Yeah. Here's the other fear that I have, Jason. The largest piece of this bailout package proportionally went to large companies. And look, I get it. They didn't cause this crisis, right? And many of them are hurting and struggling as well. But I'm worried that coming out of this, we're going to see a sort of wave of mergers and acquisitions, additional consolidation that is once again going to hurt small businesses, since they did not receive as much money in this bailout as the big players, who of course are able to hire lobbyists. Boeing reportedly got their own sort of bailout provisions written into this bill. And we've left it up to the Trump administration to decide who and how and what gets this money with frankly very little oversight, at least according to the president. Are those things that concern you as well?
Everything you just said concerns me, but I think it would concern me even more if we didn't include provisions like this. You know, I'm all for oversight. There should be a lot of checking, especially after the fact. In real time, though, a lot of this is going to be administered by the Federal Reserve. I have a lot of faith in the Federal Reserve. And if you put too many constraints on them, you know, it might end up costing us a lot of jobs. The other thing to understand is that some of these programs, in fact, a lot of them will be used for lending. The TARP was incredibly unpopular, but we made our money back and we made a profit on the parts of it related to the financial system. And, you know, this time I don't expect us to make a profit, but I don't expect us to lose all of that money either. These are loans, and it's important for the government to protect itself, but it's also important for it to protect the economy.
Right. But part of what we saw coming out of the Great Recession was that it was a majority of middle class jobs that were lost, and then the jobs that were gained coming out of it were majority lower income, more precarious, gig work, those sorts of things. And part of that was because, yes, they were able to pay the money back, but because especially the banks, you know, ended up just getting bigger than ever coming out of the 2008 crash. That's my concern here, is that we end up with a situation where inequality is even further exacerbated because of the nature of the bailout and the nature of the resiliency that large corporations have been granted and given versus small businesses.
Yeah, look, I mean, I agree. First of all, I've been worried about the increased monopolization of the economy. It's something I've written a lot about.
Yeah.
And, you know, I would hate to see this make that problem even worse. I think the solution to this isn't less for big businesses, and a lot of it, as I said, is loans, but it's potentially more for small businesses and especially for low-income households. The legislation that passed Congress didn't include any expansion of nutritional assistance. We're going to need additional rounds of checks. You're seeing states dramatically cut their budgets. That will include things like cutbacks in education, which is important for families across this country. We need to protect those budgets with more money for states. So I think, you know, my solution to the very real and legitimate problem you identified is more of everything else.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jason. Really appreciate your insight.
Thanks, Jason. We appreciate it. Next up on Rising, the international president of the Association of Flight Attendants says so-called help for the airlines may just be signing off on thousands of pink slips. That when Rising continues.